Lawrence Welk once fired a musician on the spot, right in the middle of a performance, simply because the man had taken a sip of alcohol before going on stage. No warning, no second chances. In front of hundreds of audience members, he erased that person's name from the band as if he had never existed. A cold, almost ruthless act. Yet it was also the very principle that built his decades-long music empire. He was an immigrant with a thick German accent, mocked for his broken English, raised on a poor farm in North Dakota, where childhood meant hard labor more than any stage lights. No one believed that awkward boy with an accordion would become an icon of American television. But that very roughness shaped a different kind of man. Disciplined to the extreme, obsessively clean, and so unwavering that it made others uneasy. On screen, Sir Lawrence Welk was the embodiment of elegance, soft music, floating champagne bubbles, and a gentle smile that never faded. Off-screen, he controlled every detail, every person, every note. No deviation, no exceptions. He built a perfect world. But what was the price of that perfection? This is the story of Lawrence Welk, the man who turned simplicity into an empire, discipline into power, and lived his entire life between two extremes: a public figure who was always gracious, and a private man who never allowed himself to be weak. But Lawrence Welk's story did not begin with music. It began with a departure. Before he was born, his family had already endured a journey in which choices had grown scarce, leaving only the need to keep living. They were Germans from Russia, once settled in the Odessa region, a place that had promised stability for farming families. But those promises gradually faded as times changed, and then the famine of the late 19th century struck, claiming the lives of hundreds of thousands. Among them was the family's first child, Johann. No full account remains of that moment, but the decision that followed is clear. In 1893, they left the land they knew, traveling long distances by train and ship, arriving in America with a simple hope: to start again. From South Dakota, then moving up to North Dakota. Yet they stopped on land that barely had a shape yet, a place where people had to create the conditions to survive before they could even think about living better. It was on that land, in 1903, that Lawrence Welk was born in Strasburg, North Dakota. He was the sixth of 8 children, raised in a family where each day was measured by labor. No electricity, no reliable heating, winter so long and cold that water froze in the basin every morning. The children would wake up, break the thin layer of ice to wash their faces, then step outside where work was already waiting. In the summer, they went to the fields early, working under the sun for hours. A day could stretch to 12 hours, and the next day would begin exactly the same. Life there left little room for choice. If you didn't work, you couldn't survive. If you couldn't endure exhaustion, you couldn't stay. That relentless rhythm built a solid foundation, a body accustomed to labor, a spirit not easily broken, and a belief that everything had to be built with one's own hands. And yet, in the middle of all that, Lawrence Welk did not fully belong to that place. He wasn't good with machinery, not skillful with farm work, and had no natural instinct for the rhythm of life his siblings followed every day. In a family where everyone knew what to do to keep life going, he was the one out of step. No one said it out loud, but the difference was always there. Subtle, but impossible to ignore. It wasn't a dramatic conflict. There were no arguments, no rebellion, just a quiet, lingering feeling. He was in the right place, but not the right person for it. And then, the turning point came in a way no one could have predicted. At the age of 11, an attack of appendicitis brought him to the fragile line between life and death. After he recovered, Lawrence could not immediately return to his old life. For nearly a year, He remained in the small house, separated from the familiar rhythm of farm life. No school, no fields, no longer part of the cycle of work that had once defined his days. In the living room stood an organ and his father's accordion. No one placed them there as an escape. But in those long days, when his body was too weak to work, Lawrence began to touch the keys, not to learn, but to fill the silence. At first, and the sounds were scattered. Then they found rhythm. Then they stayed a little longer each day. There was no teacher, no clear goal, just a boy, a quiet room, and sounds that, for the first time, were not interrupted by labor. And in that period, while everything outside had paused, something else began to take shape, slowly but deeply enough not to disappear once life resumed. No one told him it was a path. No one guaranteed where it would lead. But for the first time, Lawrence Welk no longer had to keep up with a pre-existing rhythm. He began to listen to a different one, his own. When his health returned, he did not go back to school. He stayed on the farm, continuing to work as before. But something had changed. Music was no longer something that appeared only in the evenings. It became something he carried with him throughout the day. It did not replace his old life, but existed alongside it, like a direction not yet defined, but impossible to ignore. By around the age of 17, Lawrence made a proposal to his father, a quiet but unmistakably clear one. And he wanted an accordion priced at $400, a significant sum at the time. In return, he would stay for another 4 years, work, and hand over all the money he earned from playing music to the family. There was no argument, no rebellion, no dramatic break, just an agreement. He kept his word. He worked during the day, played music whenever he had the chance, gave up all his earnings, and repeated that cycle for years. In 1924, when Lawrence Welk turned 21, he left the farm, not as someone running away, but as someone who had fulfilled his obligation. There was no contract, no invitation, no guarantee of what lay ahead. A young man carrying his accordion boarded a train, leaving behind the prairie he had never truly belonged to, heading towards small towns where music existed in the form of dances, temporary shows, dusty wooden halls, and dim yellow lights. He moved through the local bands, taking unstable positions that shifted depending on each place's needs. There wasn't always a stage, and audiences didn't always stay. In an environment where many musicians could read music fluently, Lawrence had to learn differently by listening, remembering, repeating. He didn't enter music with polished technique, but with endurance. Every song was learned by ear, and every performance a trial, an adjustment, a chance to better understand what the audience needed. In 1925, at a fair, he met George T. Kelly, a seasoned performer familiar with the stage and how to hold an audience. Kelly did not teach him music in an academic sense. He showed Lawrence how a performance worked, the opening rhythm, how to draw attention, how to keep the space from falling into silence. In the 2 years working with Kelly, Lawrence learned something that would later become the core of his career. A performer does not stand above the audience, but among them. By 1927, he began to stand on his own. His first bands were assembled from people who could play together, not from perfect resumes. The name Hotsy Totsy Boys appeared in small-town performances, where music was tied more to the dance floor than to fame. The shows took place in tight, intimate spaces where the distance between stage and audience barely existed. There, the audience's reactions appeared instantly, a step slowing down, a wider turn, a pause stretching a few beats longer. Lawrence watched those details to adjust. It was not the genre that determined the performance, but the people standing in front of him. He stopped in Yankton, where a small radio station called WNAX was looking for acts to fill its broadcast time. There was no stage, no lights, no hall to see direct reactions. Only a microphone, a closed room, and sound traveling straight into homes dozens, hundreds of miles away. The first broadcast passed like a test. Nothing guaranteed it would be remembered. But after the program ended, the station's phone began to ring. Calls came in, messages were recorded, song requests were sent. In a place where the performer could not see the audience, that response became the clearest proof. Someone was listening. Lawrence Welk's name began to appear in conversations, spreading beyond a single performance room, traveling through radio waves to small towns across South Dakota, Nebraska, and Iowa. There was no single explosive moment to mark it, only repetition. Each broadcast, each time his name was mentioned again, enough times to become familiar. In that environment, what Lawrence Welk learned was not about playing a specific genre correctly, but about reading audience response in real time. When he could no longer see the audience directly as on stage, the signals shifted into other forms: calls, song requests, names mentioned repeatedly. Instead of building a fixed style, he began to build a method. Track the response, keep what was requested, and remove what failed to hold listeners. But the sound from those broadcasts in Yankton did not stay in the studio. It opened a wider trajectory of movement, pulling Lawrence Welk back onto the familiar roads of the Midwest. But this time, he was no longer an unknown musician. Performances stretched across South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, and beyond. Ballrooms, small hotels, town halls, each place a different audience, a different rhythm, a different way of listening. The schedule grew dense, journeys following one another, one night's performance overlapping the next. Music was no longer a separate moment, but a continuous chain, where each show had to hold listeners long enough for them to return the next time. In the middle of those travels, Lawrence was not only on stage. He stepped off it, managing the band, handling expenses, finding venues, thinking of ways to keep his name appearing more often. Small ideas began to form, from attaching his name to products to finding ways for audiences to remember him even after the performance ended. During a performance in 1938 at a hotel in Pittsburgh, a radio man heard his music and casually described it as champagne. Light, bright, rhythmic, easy to approach. The description stayed. Lawrence did not explain it, nor did he change himself to fit it. He kept it as a name, a way for audiences to call what they were hearing without needing further definition. Champagne music began to appear alongside his name, not as a new genre, but as a feeling repeated through each performance. Within the space of ballrooms and regional radio, the name Lawrence Welk gradually took on a clearer shape. Audiences did not just come to hear a band, they came to hear a kind of music they could recognize before the song even ended. A small signal, but enough to keep them staying a little longer. But that reach still had its limits. The journeys kept returning to familiar regions. The broadcasts remained mostly local. His music was remembered across many towns and small cities, but had not yet crossed that boundary. There was no explosion, only a slow, steady movement, where each step forward did not immediately change his position, but made it harder to replace him. The journeys through small towns gradually came to a close at a more fixed point: Chicago. Not a symbolic choice, but a practical decision. A city large enough to sustain an audience, yet close enough to the Midwest not to lose those already familiar with him. At the Trianon Ballroom, Lawrence Welk no longer moved constantly between temporary venues. He stayed. Each night, the same stage, the same band, the same space, but not the same audience. In the 1940s, the Trianon Ballroom became the place where Lawrence Welk no longer had to experiment every night. He remained in the same space long enough to realize that the difference did not lie in the music itself, but in how a room responded each evening. There were nights when people moved from the very first beats. There were nights that needed more time for the dance floor to fill. He began to adjust not according to the score, but according to the state of the room. When to keep people there, when to draw them back, when to prevent the space from falling flat. At the same time, he began stepping into another kind of presence, soundies, short musical films played on jukebox projectors. Not cinema in the full sense, but the first time his music was paired with images. The camera did not seek complexity. It recorded how the band functioned, how the performers stood, moved, and kept time. These clips did not turn him into a film star, but they placed him in a space where music could be seen, not just heard. On the recording side, a song like "Shame on You" appeared in his catalog and reached a high position on the jukebox charts of the time. The song did not carry a complex structure, nor did it push listeners toward clear climaxes. It followed a straight, accessible line, keeping the melody familiar enough that listeners did not have to struggle to follow it. Its success did not come from creating something new, but from placing the right sound at the right moment, when people needed something they could listen to again without adjusting their emotions. Radio continued to expand that reach. By the late 1940s, Lawrence Welk's program appeared on ABC, carrying his music beyond the Midwest. The audience was no longer just those standing in ballrooms, but those sitting in their living rooms, listening through radio speakers in the evening. His name began to travel across multiple states, repeating in fixed time slots, long enough to become a familiar part of daily life. But even as that reach expanded, his position in the big band world did not sit at the center. Other large orchestras led the trends, shaping the sound of the era, appearing on bigger stages, producing recordings that were mentioned more often. Lawrence Welk stood in a different place, not the one creating trends, but the one maintaining a steady rhythm outside of them. Competition was everywhere. In larger ballrooms, in radio programs with bigger budgets, in bands with more complex technique. Lawrence did not enter that competition by changing his sound to surpass them. He held to a different method, continuing to play for the same group of listeners who had been there from the beginning, observing how they responded, and adjusting each performance based on very small signals. A slowing step, a pause that lingered longer than usual, and a song that kept them there just a little more. Music, in the way he used it, was not a place to create a clear distinction from the rest of the market. It was a tool to keep listeners from leaving. Each performance did not need to be better than the last. It only needed to be right enough for the audience to return next time without reconsidering their choice. Over time, that method created a different kind of presence. Not an explosive rise to take the center, but a repetition steady enough that listeners no longer searched for alternatives. While other bands changed to keep up with new tastes, Lawrence Welk held on to a group of listeners who did not move at that same pace. And this was what made his position difficult to replace in the usual way. The steady rhythm of the ballroom in Chicago did not last forever. By the late 1940s, as television began to enter everyday life, dance floors started to thin. A different kind of stage was forming, smaller, colder, without the smell of wood, without the sound of footsteps, yet able to travel farther than any tour. Lawrence Welk saw this not through theory, but through very concrete signs. Audiences stayed home more. Yes, radio was no longer the only center, and moving images began to change how people received music. He left Chicago, taking his band to California. The stop was the Aragon Ballroom in Venice, a hall by the sea where the dance floor gently vibrated with the sound of waves beneath it. There, a film crew from KTLA recorded big band performances. When the camera turned toward Lawrence Welk, everything unfolded as it had on previous nights. The band played, the singers stepped forward, the audience moved. There was no change in how he performed, but there was one difference. The image no longer remained in the room. After the filming, the station's phone began to ring. Calls came in asking about the program, the band, the host, standing at the center of the stage with his distinct accent. It was the first time Lawrence Welk encountered a kind of audience he could not see directly, yet their response arrived faster than any applause. Television did not replace the stage. It expanded it beyond physical space. From those experimental recordings, a program bearing his name began to appear regularly on KTLA in 1951. There was no complex structure. A band, singers, a few dance numbers, and Lawrence standing in the center, introducing, guiding, keeping the rhythm of the entire show. The camera moved among the performers, capturing each moment, then bringing everything into a frame that viewers could follow from their living rooms. What once took place in a ballroom was now recreated on a screen. No travel, no tickets, no need to leave one's seat. Lawrence did not enter television as a different version of himself. What he had done on stage, the way he chose songs, kept rhythm, read audience reactions, remained almost unchanged, only now it happened in front of the camera. The difference was not in how he changed, but in how each decision no longer ended within a single room, but was repeated across thousands of rooms at the same time. By 1955, the program was picked up by ABC for nationwide broadcast as a summer replacement series, a short window not considered a prime position, but within that time slot, the show held its audience, held its rhythm, and more importantly, held its familiarity. While other programs shifted with new trends, Lawrence Welk offered something that did not change. His name began to appear on national broadcast schedules, entering weekend evenings, repeating long enough to become a habit. No longer just performances in one city, no longer a regional program. Lawrence Welk stepped into a wider space where each appearance was seen by millions at once, not through a sudden breakthrough, but through repeating the same form long enough for it to become routine. When the show aired at a fixed time each week, the audience did not need to decide whether to watch. They simply turned it on, like something already embedded in the rhythm of their lives. In the early 1960s, the Lawrence Welk Show entered a state of almost absolute stability on national television. Each week, the program appeared with the same established structure: the orchestra opening, the familiar voice of the host, performances following one another in an easy-to-follow order. The camera moved slowly, maintaining just enough distance so viewers were not pulled out of their own space. The music was selected according to a consistent principle: clear, recognizable melodies that did not push emotions too far, that did not require the listener to adjust. Behind that seemingly simple format was a tightly controlled system. Thousands of letters arrived each month, carrying song requests, feedback on tempo, on singers, on how the program was arranged. These details were not ignored. They were recorded, compiled, then fed directly back into shaping future episodes. A performance was kept because the audience remembered it. A segment was adjusted because the rhythm was not quite right. The program did not move ahead of its viewers. It moved with them, step by step. That very method kept the show embedded in television life for many years, but at the same time placed it increasingly out of alignment with the rest of the industry. As popular music began to change more rapidly, as tempo, visuals, and television production styles became denser and more direct, and the Lawrence Welk Show remained exactly as it was. There was no effort to restructure in order to keep up with emerging trends, no sign of shifting to reach a different audience. Outside, the response began to shift clearly. Articles, critiques, and parodies of the show appeared more frequently, labeling his style as a sign of being outdated. His voice, his manner of hosting, his musical choices, all became details that were easily recognized and easily placed in opposition to newer trends. Yet within those reactions, there was no indication that Lawrence adjusted his direction. He did not alter the structure of the program to soften criticism. He did not change his image to reduce the distance between himself and the rest of the industry. Inside the studio, everything continued according to the established rhythm. The orchestra took their positions. Performances followed their familiar order. The letters were still read, still turned into concrete decisions for future episodes. That stability was not the result of failing to recognize change, but a deliberate choice to preserve a space that had already proven it could keep viewers watching, even as the rest of television moved in a different direction. In 1971, ABC removed The Lawrence Welk Show from its national broadcast schedule. On the surface, it was simply a program losing its airtime, but at a deeper level, it exposed the structure of television itself. A show could exist for years, maintain a stable audience, generate steady revenue, and still be cut when a network chose to reposition its own image. And Lawrence Welk was not removed because his system had stopped working. He was removed because the distribution system above it had shifted. At that moment, Lawrence's response showed that he was not just a host who could keep rhythm. He understood clearly what was core and what was merely surface. The national time slot was gone, but the program was not the same thing as that slot. The audience still existed. The library of performances still existed. The orchestra, the singers, the technical crew, the production process, the format of performance, the habits of viewers, all remained intact. What disappeared was only the largest pipeline. Lawrence saw that point precisely. He did not spend much time negotiating for a place within a system that was moving away from him. He moved to build another system. Instead of continuing to depend on a central network, he shifted the program into syndication, a model less glamorous but far more flexible. Here, the show no longer lived by a single decision made in New York or Los Angeles. It was sold directly to individual local stations, to each market, each specific time slot. Broadcast power was no longer concentrated in one place. It was broken apart, and that very fragmentation made the program harder to eliminate. One network could drop him. Hundreds of local stations would not act as a single unified block. This was a strategic shift, not merely a reactive one. Under the old model, Lawrence Welk was part of a national broadcast schedule. Under the new model, he became the provider of a finished product to multiple outlets at once. This way of operating did not make the show newer, younger, or more in tune with trends. It made it structurally more durable. Once the content was produced at the right rhythm, to the right technical standard, and for a loyal audience, its value no longer depended on recognition from a major network, but on its ability to keep selling and keep filling time slots across different places. Off-screen, this also triggered a more significant shift. Lawrence was no longer just managing a television performance. He was managing a media asset. Each recorded episode no longer existed as a one-time broadcast that disappeared afterward. It became a unit that could be redistributed, rerun, extending its commercial lifespan beyond its initial week. Within that logic, the content library accumulated over years was not a relic of the past. It was inventory that continued to generate value. Because of that, after 1971, what matters most is not that he kept the same orchestra or still stood in the same familiar position in the studio. What matters is that he moved from a model dependent on national broadcast to one where he owned a machine capable of pushing content into the market itself. The network once gave him reach. Syndication gave him a different kind of control, less prestigious on the surface, but more autonomous at its core. Behind that shift was a consistent mindset he had carried long before. Never let an entire career depend on a single source of income. As the program continued in syndication, Lawrence also expanded what did not appear on screen. He increased his control over and exploitation of his music catalog, publishing rights and revenue streams tied to what the show regularly used. In another direction, and he continued investing in real estate in California. These areas did not create a public image as clearly as a television show, but they produced something television could not guarantee: stability beyond airtime. This reveals another aspect of Lawrence Welk. He is often seen as a symbol of consistency, of safe music, and of a television world that avoided disruption. But after 1971, a less visible side emerged. He was not naive about the system. He did not confuse visibility with control. When a network ended his presence on national television, he did not see it as the end of the program. He saw it as a signal that the program's survival had to be moved out of someone else's hands. From that point on, the Lawrence Welk Show existed under a different logic. It was no longer a product backed by the prestige of a major network. It was a program that knew exactly where its audience was, knew how to reach them, and knew how to continue generating revenue without needing to be at the center of popular culture. And that shift did not change how the show looked on screen, but it completely transformed the foundation beneath it. And it was at that foundational level that Lawrence Welk proved he was not just skilled at keeping time for a performance. He was skilled at keeping an entire system from collapsing when its biggest support was taken away. By 1982, when new episodes stopped being produced, the system logic he had built after the 1971 cut continued to operate. This was no longer the story of a program that needed to release new episodes every week to prove it was still alive. After years of accumulation, the program's own library had become an asset large enough to enter a second life cycle. Reruns did not appear as a sign of exhaustion. They functioned as a new layer of revenue, a mechanism for extending the value of completed content. In conventional television logic, once an episode aired, it was over. In the logic Lawrence Welk built, it still retained the ability to generate income and to keep audiences. As the show entered more sustainable rerun cycles, especially on PBS, what was confirmed was not only audience loyalty, but the correctness of the model he chose after 1971. A program once removed by a network could outlive the moment of its removal, as long as it possessed a clearly defined content library, a sufficiently loyal audience, and a distribution system not dependent on a single gatekeeper. Here, Lawrence Welk did not win by returning to the center. He won by making the center no longer a necessary condition for survival. There was a part of Lawrence Welk's life that did not pass through the stage, did not exist under lights, and was not introduced by any narration. It began in Yankton, when his name still lived on local radio waves. Fern Renner heard him before she met him, through a radio in her dorm room, through scattered stories from friends. When she stepped into the place where he performed, she did not see a man who had already succeeded, but one still trying to hold his position. Lawrence noticed her from the very first time. Fern did not respond quickly. She stayed at a distance long enough, far enough, that he had to return again and again. That distance was not closed by a single defining moment. He continued to appear after each performance, lingering a little longer, saying one more sentence, waiting one more beat. And their meetings did not stack on top of each other, but stretched out over time between travels and unstable performances. By 1931, they married. There were no lights, no crowds, no constructed story to be retold. A family began quietly, just as he had entered music without explosion, but without stopping. In the years that followed, their home gradually filled. 3 children grew up in a space where music was always present, rehearsals, songs repeated, evenings when the band lingered after the show. But one thing did not follow that same pattern: the times he was present. There were evenings when the dinner table was set with all the dishes, chairs pulled out in place, yet one seat remained empty. No one mentioned it. The meal went on, conversations continued, only one person was missing, and no one named that absence. Lawrence's work did not end when he left the stage. It extended into overnight train rides, suitcases not yet unpacked, hotel rooms so similar they did not need names. When television moved to the center, that rhythm did not slow, it intensified. Early morning rehearsals, long recording sessions, tapes to review, letters to read, small details to adjust before broadcast. There were weeks he left home before the children woke and returned after they had fallen asleep. Time at home did not disappear, but it was fragmented, no longer long enough to become something reliable. Fern remained within that rhythm. She did not step into the center, did not move outward, did not take part in his public image. She kept the home running according to a different logic, a schedule not dependent on an audience, not changing with the studio, not adjusted by letters sent from viewers. Meals were still on time, small tasks still done each day, as a way of preserving a part of life that was not pulled outward. These two rhythms existed in parallel, never directly colliding, yet never fully aligning. Lawrence could step onto a stage and keep an entire room moving to the same tempo. He could adjust a song, change the order of performances, pull an audience back when the rhythm began to slip. But inside his own home, there was no structure that allowed him to do the same. An evening that passed would not return, and an absence had no rehearsal. Those moments did not disappear. They accumulated, not into a single event, not into a clear breaking point, but long enough to become part of how the family functioned. His children grew up within that divided presence. A father always on screen, appearing on time every week, leading a program watched by millions, yet not always present in the smaller, unrecorded moments. That difference did not create an immediate fracture. It stretched over years, through repeated absences, until it was no longer recognized as a lack, but as a familiar state. The marriage between Lawrence Welk and Fern Renner did not end with an event. There was no divorce, no scandal, no clear stopping point. They remained together until the end of their lives, leaving behind no public rupture large enough for outsiders to name. Yet within that intact surface, there were two systems that never fully met. One that could be adjusted according to the response of millions, and one that had no way to revise what had already passed. See, when new episodes stopped in 1982, the program did not disappear. It simply moved out of continuous production into a state of exploiting what had been accumulated over many previous years. The studio no longer lit up on the old schedule, but recordings continued to be rebroadcast through syndication, keeping the show present in the lives of viewers in a quieter way. Audiences did not seek something new. They returned to familiar performances, known melodies, like returning to a space that required no adjustment. During that period, Lawrence still appeared on stage, took part in special programs, reunion recordings, stepping forward with his familiar accordion and unchanged manner of hosting. Less frequent, but without the feeling of an ending. Alongside those appearances, what lay behind the stage continued to operate. Music catalogs, publishing rights, and real estate projects in California were maintained and expanded, forming a stable foundation not dependent on frequent television appearances. By the mid-1980s, the program entered another life cycle when reruns were carried on PBS. No longer new content, yet it found a more durable position, where longtime viewers returned and another generation began to discover the show through those unchanged images. The episodes kept their original structure, no adjustments, and no remakes, and that very consistency created a second life for the program, not replacing the past, but extending it. In his final years, Lawrence returned to North Dakota more often, not to perform, but to revisit the spaces that had existed before he ever left. He returned to Strasbourg as a familiar figure, stepping into the church, walking through old roads, appearing in activities that required no stage. These trips were not events, but they created a different kind of balance, separate from the operational rhythm that had followed him for most of his life. On May 17, 1992, Lawrence Welk passed away at the age of 89. There was no grand ceremony, no staged moment to close the journey. He was laid to rest in a private service, ending a life that had stretched nearly a century in a quiet and contained way. When he left, the program continued to be rerun. The system he had built kept operating, and the assets accumulated over decades retained their value, with a total net worth exceeding hundreds of millions of dollars. After Lawrence Welk was gone, the Lawrence Welk Show did not disappear, but the way it existed changed. On PBS, reruns continued to appear on a steady schedule, not as a program that needed to compete, but as something preserved. What had once been produced for a single week of broadcast now entered a different life cycle. No need to be new, no need to be adjusted, and yet still capable of filling time and keeping viewers. This was only possible because the program was not built as a series of isolated events, but as a library of content that could continue to function after its creator was no longer there. Each recorded episode was not just a finished broadcast, but a unit that could be replayed, reused, extending its value across decades. In that logic, Lawrence Welk's legacy does not lie in a standout moment, but in the ability of what he created to exist beyond the moment it first aired. Elsewhere, his starting point has been preserved in a similar way. The wooden house in Strasbourg, where he was born, has not been restored into a perfected symbol, but kept as close as possible to its original condition. The cramped space, the dirt floor, the traces of a life dependent on manual labor remain present. People do not go there to hear a neatly arranged story, but to see the starting conditions before any stage ever existed. The audience that remained with the program was not a random group. These were people who did not move at the speed of new trends, who did not need each television season to bring a different form. They did not follow the program to find something new, but to preserve a familiar rhythm in their lives. In an entertainment industry built on constant replacement, the fact that a group of viewers maintain the same choice across decades is not natural. It is the result of a system designed not to force them to change. Even within the program itself, that logic was preserved. Musicians and singers were not constructed as isolated individuals, but existed within a structure where each person had a clear role and could maintain that role over many years. Some spent most of their careers within the same system, uninterrupted by short-term projects, not required to constantly redefine themselves to keep working. This did not create easily identifiable peaks, but it created a rare kind of stability, where work was not fragmented into separate phases. What remains of Lawrence Welk is not an image that can be separated from the whole, but the way that whole continues to operate in his absence. The program is still broadcast, the content library is still used, the place where he began is still preserved, and his audience still exists as part of that system. And there is no clear starting point to this legacy, and no definite ending. It exists according to the very logic he built, without needing expansion to prove it is still alive, and without needing change to continue to exist.